Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May our bodies experience perfect health, and may our life force flow unimpeded. May our minds expand in their capacity to know Brahman. For the Upanishads state that all existence is Brahman. Therefore, may we never deny Brahman, and may Brahman never deny us. May there be no rejection of Brahman ever by us, we who are dedicated to the realization of the Atman within. May all the divine qualities cited in the Upanishads also abide within us. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat. Welcome to another online satsang as we visit each other from places around the world. Always with the Dharma on our mind, leading towards higher wisdom and truth. Those are good stepping stones, combination of levels to always be aware of, rather than just remaining in mundane human conventional realms, as our founder Lex Sixon used to say, a phrase that he coined, mundane human convention. Have to go beyond that, and as my Guru Swami Sheshanandaji, peace and bliss be upon him, also said many times, have to also get beyond the intellectual frame of reference that the Westerner, particularly the scientist and the secular society, has gotten into, and sort of remains stuck there as if that's as high as one could go. Sort of like taking a hot air balloon to the ceiling or something. So you want to instead be able to soar with the Great Swan, as our founder also used to say. My practice, I call it soaring with the Great Swan. And he and I even had a Great Swan handshake that we made up whenever we saw each other. Our two hands came together and the thumbs formed the head of a swan and the hands were the wings, and we'd meet and then go soar with the Great Swan. We would say that to each other and gaze into each other's eyes. And so that was the beauty of living in Ramakrishna Loka, even here on earth. And of course, Sharda Loka. And with the background of the Vivekananda Vedanta, we might call it nowadays, he's brought this Neo-Vedanta, or given the traditional teachings a new face on ancient tradition. So we are very pleased to be able to sit amongst each other week to week. Day to day would be better. And of course you can do that on our new website. They're calling it ASR, Ashram of the Subtle Realms, where you can just go to the ashram and sign in, and then drink in all sorts of dharmic nectar, everything directly in accord with knowledge and higher wisdom and non-dual truth. And that gives you your daily half-hour to hour practice, even just going up there and spending time and then contemplating those great teachings. It's one of the forgotten arts of spiritual life, is manana, how to contemplate. People are listening sometimes and they're also meditating, but between those two steps is manana, shruti, manana, nididhyasana. The manana is taking time to roll it around in your mind so that the mind becomes saturated with thoughts about it. Thoughts of God alone, as the Upanishadic shloka says. You're supposed to take the bow of the mighty weapon of the bow of the Upanishads, fasten to it the arrow of mind, made sharpened by thoughts on reality alone, then release and penetrate the mark, the eternal Brahman. So quoting straight out of the Upanishads, we can see how important it is to keep our minds fastened on that one eternal goal. Also easy to forget amongst people when they do their spiritual practice is this ability to keep the non-dual Brahman at the forefront of the mind. And maybe even a further subtle level to that spiritual art form, is even keeping Brahman in the background consciously while one goes about their daily actions. So otherwise, negligence of Brahman is a very unfortunate predicament that whole societies fall into. As Lord Buddha used to say, non-recitation of scriptures is the rust of households. Is the rust of monasteries, and non-spiritual self-effort or lack of spiritual self-effort is the rust of households. So there's this kind of corrosion that sets in to both the monastic life and to the householder life if one doesn't keep one's mind focused on the non-dual Brahman or on the teachings all the time. And then it just floats off into what we just said, mundane human convention. A kind of commonplace, everyday mind that just runs in very shallow and small circles. So to avoid that, we want to soar with the Great Swan, or expand our consciousness, as the peace chant I just recited. May our minds expand in their ability to focus on Brahman. So warming your minds up this Saturday morning, Sat Day, Day of Truth, to the subject, then I want to pass it on to you straight away so that you can formulate some questions inside of the Sangha that we have gathered here. Our Sangha is worldwide and far flung, as the expression goes. As children of Sri Ramakrishna, we are some 5 or 6 million strong who have recognized him, and probably is about the right quotient for a world of 7 or 8 billion, but right percentage. And because Sri Krishna says in the Gita that 1 out of 1,000 come to know me. So I don't know, maybe Tadrupa can tell us, figure it out real quick, what 5 million, what's the percentage of 5 million to 8 billion? And see what the percentage of people on earth. Do you know, Tadrupa? You'd have to unmute your computer to let us know. But unmute your computer so we can hear you. So 8 billion people on the planet, roughly 5 million followers of and recognize Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. What's that percentage of people who know about him on earth today?
Yeah. I'll type it in the chat.
Oh, you put it in the chat?
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. I'm curious to know myself. So, of course, 5 million who are dedicated to him, and then probably many million other that have heard of him, of course, not just in India, but outside of India. And so we're very fortunate to know of the divine descent, I used to call it. Divine descent, or what they've mentioned in India as the new dispensation. As the avatar comes each age and gives a new dispensation, and shines a new light on yoga and on Vedanta and on the Tantra and on Samkhya and all the darshanas. He's a great spotlight, Swami Vivekananda said about his guru, who shines a great light on all of the Indian scriptures and does so in fresh fashion, age to age. Yuge cha dharmasya. He brings the Dharma to us with this facelift, as it were, from age to age. So maybe you have been delving into the Dharma more and more. I hope you have, and doing the manana process, running it around in your mind, reflecting or concentrating inwardly. And possibly some questions have come out of that. So I'm inquiring right now in satsang fashion. If you have a question or two, you can share with the group.
Hi, Babaji.
Namaste,
Namaste.
Neil Aranowitz.
I thought about to you, please. So, yeah, something came up in our Wednesday class, and I couldn't find the reference, but I recall Swamiji talking about how, or it's been recorded of him saying that spirituality is not about fantastic experiences; it's about building character. And I sort of paraphrased him, but is there, you recall an actual quote of him saying that, to that effect? Or teaching around that?
So it's hard to locate the source of that saying, whether it was Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, or Swamiji, but I'm sure they all batted it around amongst them that spiritual life is not about miracles and visions. It's about building character. So, and of course, that's a very beautiful, I'm thinking of everything that I hear these days as a God blog, because I've been writing God blogs on the new website. Those are just little bites, Brahman bites, I call them, B-Y-T-E-S. And so I'm putting those up. I wrote 3 of them yesterday. I couldn't help myself. Just thinking of all the Dharma, have to share it with everyone, as Milarepa says. So I posted a new one called, do you have a fish in your, do you have a net in your mouth? About the story. Ramakrishna about the 4 kinds of fish caught in the net. And then I wrote 3 others yesterday, and I'll probably post them over time. But that's another good God blog subject right there you just brought up, about how building character is the real essence of spiritual life. That really sets Ramakrishna and the Ramakrishna order apart from many other movements of the day, I think, because Swamiji even said in the early days, he said, we were just a bunch of young boys and we had left home, and Sri Ramakrishna had passed, and their parents were wanting us all to come back home and marry and everything. But he said Sri Ramakrishna had taught us one thing, and it was how to actually live a spiritual life. So they were looking around them to other organizations and groups right there in Calcutta. This is in India in the 1800s. They were looking around and they're finding people were just kind of masquerading a spiritual life. And Sri Ramakrishna had taught them how to actually live one. So this is all paraphrasing Swami Vivekananda again. But it reminds me of that saying you just brought up. And I actually allocate it to Holy Mother, because I know that she said that. Spiritual life is not about visions and miracles, it's about building character. So we know that the hard knocks of life, for instance, tend to build that character in us, because we can face off with them and gain strength through them. And that's why the land of Bharat, they used to call India, ancient word for India was Bharat, the eternal land. The land of Bharat has been weaned religiously, philosophically, and spiritually on difficult environment, difficult situations. And if nature and the countryside and other neighboring countries were not hard enough to deal with, then they took on the hardships themselves on purpose. It's called asceticism, and it's called yoga and forest dwelling and other things in which they entered into willingly, or just give it the overall word of renunciation, or what's another good word for it, Price?
Austerity.
Yeah, what's the Sanskrit?
Tapas.
Tattvas, yeah. So when Price got initiated some weeks ago, he received the name of Tapodana, rich in the ability to take on austerity. He's sitting in a very rundown garage right now. There, you see in a t-shirt, doing his tapas, and works all day very hard, and so knows the meaning of what it is to do austerity to build character. So those kinds of things one takes on willingly, but it's not very commonplace in America, where everything is rather easy of access, and you can even go the other direction with it, towards gluttony, or too much of things, too much money, too much power, too much lands. Just be content with what is, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Just be content with what is. So building character then would be one of the great purposes of spiritual life. And you see that character shining through the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, who actually learned how to live a spiritual life and then came west, which is an austerity in itself, and transmitted that ability to us. And we're carrying on that tradition through the decades. So that's a more specific rendering of that quote, Anurag.
Thank you.
It's probably apropos to us because of miracles. We probably wouldn't have some of us, that is, wouldn't have such a cautious attitude about miracles if it hadn't been brought to us that most of what the world's doing today is seeking the aid of occult powers without even knowing it. Like domination over others was making yourself great and making others small. Those are all tactics of government and politics, and making oneself beautiful to attract other beings out of deceit. When they meet you, they think you're beautiful outside because of the things you've done to your makeup and all that, but inside you don't look very good, but you're covering that up. All of these are kinds of occult powers called the Astabalasiddhas, and those kinds of people are always mystery mongering. And so it was good that Sri Ramakrishna made us aware of that, so that we could not fall into that trap in the name of spiritual life. We keep everything authentic and true to the point and to the goal of human existence.
I have found that in my own case in the past, and with a lot of people, especially in the West, they're always seeking great experiences, whether through drugs or something or other. And it seems to me, from experience and from observation, that try not to, like following the Yamas and Niyamas, try not telling a lie for a whole week, telling the truth, or that'll change your consciousness in a big way. So, and I think the wonderful experiences come as a matter of course if you focus on, building your own character. And I think the great guide for that, of course, is the Yamas and Niyamas.
Definitely one of the best systems for it. It just laces it all together so well. So one of my points has been with the Westerner, particularly entering into yoga, put the complaint about just centering on asana alone aside for now, is that people don't practice the yamas and niyamas with any real longevity or intensity before they jump to meditation. So it's just like go, see the tree of yoga and try and jump to the eighth limb. It's a big jump. Or seventh limb, I guess, if it's meditation, but they're looking for samadhi. Sri Ramakrishna even had a story about that. He said, yes, man sees a tree, he sees fruit at the top of the tree, and before he even puts his foot on the first limb, he's already tasting the fruit in his mind, as if he has it in his hand already. I think he was probably referring to the tree of yoga when he said that, because many people, even in India, were getting stuck in pranayama and hatha yoga. And some of the youth would go to Swami Brahmananda and others and ask him, well, should we be doing hatha yoga and pranayama? And surprisingly, they got the answer. I mean, these were college kids about to go to college in India. And they would get the answers, no, don't do those things. Do mantra, because mantra accomplishes everything that asana and pranayama accomplishes, only without the dangers. So they were definitely leading people to a practice that was effective and intense and transformative, but yet didn't have the dangers of blowing out the nadis, like the physical nerves, or harming yourself, your limbs, because restlessness of limbs was one of the things that Patanjali warned against in the Yoga Sutras. Anga me jayatva, he called it. You have to have your limbs resting easily and sitting easily, your spine slightly curved. And so you get these commentators that speak about these subtler elements of the Raja Yoga through the centuries since Patanjali brought it forth in that age. It's about probably 150 or 180 AD. Was Patanjali's incarnation. He was born again in around 500 AD or 600 AD as the student of Gaudapada, the great Advaitist. So the father of yoga gets around. But in that particular lifetime, just 150 or so years after Jesus said the yoga, that's what we call Raja Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga today. And he's the great authority on that. And he was very much in favor of people taking a full course in Niyamas. In fact, later on, the commentators started calling the Sadanga Yoga, I'm sorry, I gave it away, started calling the Ashtanga Yoga Sadanga Yoga, six-limbed. And so why was that, they asked. Well, because the Yamas and Niyamas are just natural. It's something that everyone should have. So we won't even count them as two limbs of the tree. We'll just call it Sadanga, and sit, breathe, and then withdraw your mind from the objects, concentrate, meditate, and get samadhi. And then get samyama. Studying the third pada of Raja Yoga myself when I'm rewriting this book, or turning the Raja Yoga class into a book lately, and oh my, there must be a good 10, 12, 15 slokas in a row about samyama. He spends more time on samyama than he spends on any of the limbs. So after you get samadhi, that is, you see your true self, which you should have never fallen away from in the first place, then you're supposed to use it for this extremely powerful concentration of mind called samyama, so that you can unwrap everything that was a secret before, or that was hidden, or that was covered, whether it be by nature or by the human mind. You strip the wrappings off the gift and see the truth of everything, And that's how people get to seeing God in everything. This afternoon at 1 o'clock, it's in a few hours, I'm going to give the first introduction, online introduction to the Avatut. And tomorrow another 45-minute session on it. So we're beginning to take the Avatut apart. And the Avatut, when I wrote it in 1999, I had already been doing spiritual practice for a good 20 years or so. And I had been extremely attracted to the phrase, seeing God in everything. So I wondered how that was possible from the standpoint of renounce everything. And so that's a nut that I was wrestling with in my 20s, how those two somehow fit together. And so because I was attracted to that saying of Brahman is in everything, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, all is Brahman, I couldn't see how that was possible. So the Maya is also Brahman? How can that be? So looking into that, then I came upon the figure of the Avatut, who took 24 teachers in nature and wrote that book. So this afternoon, I'll be explaining the first 45-minute introduction today at 1 Hawaii time, and then tomorrow another introduction to do it, so that maybe a few months down the line, we can actually study the Avatut together, chapter by chapter, teacher by teacher. Probably many of you might have heard of the osprey. The osprey is a fish hawk. Even here in Hawaii, we have them. And so it dives into the water, gets a fish, and flies away with it. So the Avatut's watching this one day, and he sees that the crows follow the osprey and are bothering it horribly to get that fish in its claws. So the osprey flies this way and flies that way and up and down and around. And the crows follow it everywhere, cawing and pecking at it. Finally, it drops the fish and flies away, happy and free. Maybe a little hungry, but hey, that's austerity, isn't it? So the Avatut looked at that fish fall, and the crows followed the fish, and the osprey was free. And he said, "Oh, well, you're my teacher of non-attachment." And he saluted the osprey. That's probably the most famous story, or the famous teacher of the 24 teachers. You'll find that in other scriptures and mentioned by other teachers. So of the 24 teachers, the osprey is one of those that stands out. I think probably even mentioned in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna several times by the great master. So anyway, that whole seeing God in everything, including nature, was a great turning point and a great key, and probably is for people who want to know the non-dual as it hides itself among duality, or Brahman as it hides itself under the coverings of nature. And so it brings a lot of solutions together for the yearning and aspiring soul. Oh, really, Todd Rupa? There's less than 1% of people. Todd Rupa's chat gives us the number there. Less than 1% of people on Earth are aware of the avatar. That's the Kali Yuga for you. Who else had a question?
Babaji, namaste. This is
Yes,
Abhinay.
namaste. Yeah.
Pranam. I was just thinking up some questions to ask from you, and you were talking about the Yamas and the Niyamas. And what is the difference between Yamas and Niyamas and moral and ethics? They seem that they're very similar to each other, but they might also be different. If you could talk of the differences.
Yes, a case can be made that the Yamas and Niyamas are much like the 10 Commandments. Even the number is the same. But a case can also be made in another way, that the Yamas and Niyamas are less concentrated on morals and ethics and more on practice and perfection, that that if you say thou shalt not kill, that's the first commandment. Well, what's the first yama? Ahimsa, nonviolence. So you could make a correlation straight across the board with that, really. But the idea of nonviolence in India, if you study it deeper, doesn't mean that you shouldn't commit violence. Everyone has to commit violence every time they're born. You're causing violence to your mother when you're born, and your thoughts are causing violence if they're not. You're vegetarian eating vegetables, and you're causing violence to them. So it's really a matter of getting kind of a balance and a higher look at ahimsa. So it's, if you look at ahimsa, it's not that thou shalt not, it's that thou cannot. It's not possible really to commit violence to anything because it's unborn. Everything is unoriginated. So if you have that law of apari nama and ajativada, that is the birthlessness and deathlessness of all things, the unoriginated nature of everything, then you know that it was never born, so you can't kill it. And so if you're armed with that, like Arjuna had to be when he went on the battlefield in the Bhagavad Gita, then he's not killing at all. So Krishna tells him, that one who thinks he's killing and the one who thinks he's being killed, they don't know the truth. Nothing is born and nothing ever dies. So, I mean, hearing that from Sri Krishna on the battlefield is very emboldening for Arjuna, who has to go into war and fight his grandsire and his teacher on the other side of the battlefield and so forth. So it's really about, not so much about thou shalt not, it's that it's impossible to commit violence. That's a non-dual look at nonviolence, the real meaning of it. From there, then it comes down in levels that you know, the householder, even the dharmic householder, has to protect his family and his children and so forth. And so we'll have to pose some sort of resistance, even if it's nonviolent resistance, like Gandhi became known for. A kind of resistance has to be there so that you just don't get trod over. And so that's just one example of a comparison between a commandment and a yama. So they said that the yamas are observances. So you can see how that's true if you say nonviolence, truthfulness, celibacy, or moderation. Those are all observances that should be there in your mind. It'd be great if you were born with them like they are in India. And even though I find out that even though they're not probably as aware of yoga as they were in the old days, that is the eight-limbed yoga, nonetheless, because of centuries of observing the yamas and niyamas, it's gotten into their culture and the way they are. So the Hindus are very, very nonviolent, except on the airplane when it's time to get out. That's just an aside in case you've ever flown with them. They just have a built-in, almost built into their genealogy, but probably now by this time deeper than genealogy, into their samskaras, their mental makeup, that it's almost alien to them to think about causing harm to anything. So that means it's not so much, it's an observance now. It's just an observance of the truth of being, of the fact of how you should live. The niyamas are practices, though. When you have Kriya Yoga, for instance, its original founder was Patanjali. People have come up with all sorts of versions of Kriya Yoga since him, and some of them are bizarre. But the one that he championed at the beginning was just study the scriptures, have devotion to God, and do austerity. So there's that austerity coming in again from India and its peoples. If you just live in straitened circumstances all the time, but you're not you're not harmed by it, you're not bothered by it, then it can hardly be called poverty. We look from the outside and say, oh, what an impoverished country. But you go and talk to some of the people who have nothing, and they seem happier than you are, because they have this devotion to God inbred in them, as it were. It's like a facet or a concomitant of their soul. Their religion is indigenous to their soul, but we're casting about trying to find any semblance of religion nowadays in the West. Real religion, because Swamiji came here and called our religion irreligion. So we have to sit up and take stock of that, what's happened to us, if we ever had a really powerful religion in the first place. But all of that just to say that those three niyamas are practices. If you do Kriya Yoga in the original form, then you're spending your day, that is, whatever part of it you give to sadhana, which should be more and more, you're giving your day to doing austerity and studying the scriptures, sadhyaya. Austerity is tapas, as Tapo told us. And then Ishvara Pranidhana, having devotion to God. Even just bringing that back into the world would be very refreshing and welcome. Swamiji said something like, I want to bring everyone to God. All you're giving me is popularity. You bring me the newspapers, and, about my latest talk and what a big stir it's causing. That was back in 1893. He said, I just make an offering of the newspaper into the fire god, and he tossed it into the fireplace without even reading the article about himself. He said, I don't care about those things. I want to bring people to God. And he said, I'll go anywhere. I'll talk with the atheist. I'll talk with the agnostic. I'll talk with people who don't believe. I'll even talk with suffering people, and I'll talk with people who are deceived and deluded. But if I had my preference, I would talk to devotees of God, because they talk about things that are real. So that's a little bit of a piece on one of my favorite subjects, Yamas and Niyamas, that those two limbs should be very well under your belt before you sit in a cross-legged position. Because I've always said, if you sit in a cross-legged position, like say the American Indians did around the fire, then you open up that lower nadi to the rising of Kundalini, or at least to Udgata, the precursor to Kundalini. It's just a matter of fact, it's a matter of course that if you spread your legs in that way and sit, that you spread the base of the spine. And there's already energy moving up it when you sit that way. So it's a primal position. It's not just a Hindu position, and certainly not just an asana. So mastering your posture to Patanjali would be sitting like that. He didn't mention anything about dozens of different asanas. He just talked about ekasana, the one position by which you can meditate. So if he's the father of yoga, maybe we should listen to him and give up some of our obsession with twisting the body into pretzel shapes, as I like to say. Just sit in that one position and open up the base of the spine naturally. Then breathe and draw it up. It's actually a very ingenious and a very natural way of practicing the early limbs of yoga. But after you've done the Yamas Niyamas. So don't get me started, as they say, or we'll turn this hour into a retreat on yoga, which we're going to be giving hopefully in January now at Wynwood Waters near Portland. We've rescheduled now to do that yoga retreat in January around Holy Mother's birthday. Actually, over the Martin Luther King 3-day weekend, if you want to remember it that way. That's when we hope to be in the area if we don't have to cancel again because of the COVID. And now even the president has COVID, I heard, and his wife. So, well, in a sense, it's a psychosomatic thing. We all have it. If one person gets it, everyone gets it. If one person has cancer, we all have it. if one person has heart disease, we all have it. So get over it and be austere, and just keep your mind on the Dharma. That might be more than what you wanted to hear, Abhinaya, but I hope that hit the spot for you.
I need it.
And we still have a good 10, 15 minutes, it looks like. It looked like Tadrup is about to come forth with a question. Or maybe he has his computer turned off.
No, I'm here, I'm listening.
Yes, I'm sorry. I pester you all about questions all the time. It's just part of the tradition. And in satsang, we don't want it to go away in the world. Actually, we want it to come back. I know our own founder, Lex Hixon, he really didn't need to know very much when it came to Dharma of all kinds, different religions. But he'd ask the question anyway, just to help others. As if he could kind of pick questions out of people's minds, but they were not inclined to ask them for whatever reason. And he just asked the question for them. And that's also a good way to approach satsang.
Babaji, I don't know if there is any other people who would like to raise questions. Otherwise, I won't ask more.
All right, we can always rely on you. Okay, Tadrupa first and then Abhinaya.
One of the things I've noticed in contemplating the tattvas and the dissolution of the mind stream meditation is that there's this tendency for the mind to want to separate the tattvas from Maya, but you know, this idea of, I'm trying to digest this idea that, you know, there's this spilling out in fives of tattvas and going back into fives of tattvas back to the word, but that's all in Maya, right? So the tattvas themselves are Maya. So, you know, so in other words, when they say that, they're saying that even when you talk about the tattvas, it's just all a game of words and sensations, right? And thinking. Is that the idea there? Because the Western mind, even if you give it this idea of cycles and projection, sustenance and withdrawal, will still get into this thinking that it's some kind of shift from state to state to state, and that at least that change is real in cycles. So could you fill in a little bit this idea of the tattvas being in Maya? I don't think I'm quite getting it.
I can talk about that and maybe hit the spot somehow. Yeah, I mean, tattvas are Samkhya language. They originated principles back in Lord Copula's day, which was, probably a few thousand years before Krishna. So I think I didn't find any mention of Maya in that period of Samkhya in any of the scriptures, like the scriptures of some of Lord Copula's students. And you don't find a mention of Maya in yoga either. That is in the Yoga Sutras. There's not one word anywhere about Maya. So I think when you talk about Maya, you're going more toward Vedantic territory. The Vedantists are, and Buddhists. Buddhists also had that idea of coverings over the truth. And Buddhism developed through those, since 550 BC, developed its non-duality, and until it got to Dzogchen, and before that Tibetan Buddhism, Mahamudra, they were beginning to think in terms of a kind of way of seeing all as Buddha nature, and that phenomena rising and falling, that too was just Buddha nature. There was no samsara here to renounce. There's no nirvana there to attain. It's like one of the statements out of the Mahamudra, the Great Seal. So that's a you could see by the time the Tibetans got a hold of it that they were thinking in terms of a non-duality that was free of conundrums like bondage and liberation, which are good things to ponder. So through the Vedic period and into the more Vedantic period, especially towards Shankara at 700 AD and so forth, then they were treating Maya in different ways. And even Shankara treated it differently than his teacher's teacher, Gaudapada, the famous Advaitin. They treated Maya in different ways and allowed for it in different ways, or disallowed it, as the case may be. I think it came full circle, and it's best understood by Sri Ramakrishna. And when he would be asked about it, and he'd say, Maya is like poison in the snake. I mean, how ingenious is that? You know, so it's there in Brahman, but it doesn't cause Brahman any harm, is kind of the idea. But it will cause you harm, he says, if it bites you. So the tendency of Maya is to delude. And we also know that Maya can also act as a protection for the soul while it wakens up. That's why he said it's like the skin of a mango. And it protects the mango as long as it's not ripe, but nobody eats it, the skin that is. They peel it at the end and throw it away. So Maya, he was given these ingenious descriptions to Maya, like Maya's the one who puts one hand over your eyes and extends the other hand to lead you toward Brahman. So it's not a completely evil or you know, a hidden good or something. It's just unfigurable. I think the word we use in English for the Bengali word that Holy Mother used is inscrutable. It's just unfigurable. If you study it, it tends to deceive you and delude you, because it's all about appearances. Form is all about appearances. As soon as there's form, even in the mind, then there's going to be need for pratyahara, you know, withdrawing the mind from that form. And if you don't, then you fall into long cycles of attachment to form, or thinking form's the only thing. Formlessness gets lost completely. Nobody knows anything about their Atman. Sound familiar? So I don't know if that's shedding any light on your question, but tattvas are Samkhya language, and if tattva and Maya, if you put them together like that, then you could say, yes, tattvas, the mind is in Maya, the intellect's in Maya, the five elements are products of Maya, and the five senses also are in Maya. But in another sense, if you get rid of Maya by thine eye be made single by spiritual practice and knowledge, then that very same Maya you were looking at turns into Brahman. It's like a transformation right before your very eyes, that all is Brahman, when yesterday everything was Maya. I was really bothered yesterday, but today I'm like seeing the truth, you know. So where did Maya go? It must not have been real in the first place. It must have been a superimposition of my own mind over Brahman. And then you start taking responsibility for your own mistakes, philosophically speaking. Bhranti Darshana, Father of Yoga called that, false seeing. It's all your own doing. So you want to clear up, clarify everything. And when you do, then you see that the Maya stops being what it seems to be and goes back to whatever source it has. It has to be in Brahman like poison is in the snake. So it can't exist independently of Brahman. Nothing can exist independent of Brahman, which is all and everything. So I think maybe to put a finer point on it for your question, for the mind that's in Maya, Maya is real. And for the mind that's seen beyond it, it's not real anymore. So the tattvas to the mind who's is still deluded, those are to be careful of. You know, the five senses and their attachment to the objects. That's all about tattvas, isn't it? Because all five or all 10 of those are tattvas. But to the mind that's seen through Maya, those very things are seeing Brahman. The elements are, you know, the corn is showering bliss on us. Our children are showering bliss on us, the Upanishads say. So they must have been free of the deception of Maya and looking at everything as Brahman in order to say that. So maybe a pat answer to every question that ever came up in satsang is, it all depends on the quality of your consciousness.
So I just want to follow up then. So the second that the mind starts to believe in transformation and birth and death, then at that moment, that's a symptom of the mind believing in Maya. That's a symptom of being subject to Maya, not rather than Mahamaya, right? Because if mind is in Mahamaya, then every time they see some kind of flux through the senses, they're gonna immediately infer the changeless behind it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you could put that in both ways, obversely, that is. Basically, if you're feeling peace and joy and bliss and balance, then the mind is concentrating more on Mahamaya naturally. Otherwise, if you're feeling confusion and, you know, deception and all of those concomitants of lower mind, then Maya is all about you dancing in front of you at that time. That's why Swami Vivekananda said, Brahman never dreams. To think that Brahman dreams is all nonsense. You are never in Maya. It's Maya that got into you. So be done with it. So you're always in Brahman. You're thinking you're in Maya. It's kind of the idea of that. And so philosophers have played with Brahman and Maya a lot, as I said, especially in the Vedantic path, Vedic path. Because in Tantra, they just pretty much settled the problem by calling it sportive play. They went to the move Leela, you know, and Vedanta kind of goes to the move Maya when it wants to talk about form, that is. And I think they both agree that form covers formlessness, obviously. I mean, Sri Ramakrishna used to teach his devotees by, I don't have anything here right now, I could use my cloth, but just, he would hold up a piece of paper or something, and then he'd just go like this. You know, like you would do with a baby, you know, oh, you want to entertain the baby, so you cover yourself and with something, and the baby laughs and so forth. So for spiritual babies sitting in front of him like that, he would just show the nature of covering power, that form covers formlessness. And if you know that, then, and you know also how to take the covering away, that you can take it away at any time, then there's no problem in the world that you can't solve. There's no aspect of Maya you can't tear away. It's just a matter of masks, and maybe that's where you know, the masquerade ball and all that. Maybe that's where Tantra and Vedanta can come together. You know, that when Vedanta is saying that this is false superimposition, vivarta or adhyasa, then Leela is saying, oh, but it's all sportive play. Yes, it's false superimposition, but it's playfulness. Brahman's covering itself and playing with itself. And when it's done with that, it'll just take the mask off and reveal itself. So basically, you could see again the correlations between Leela and Maya.
You think you have to tear away first in order to play?
No, that wouldn't be possible. If you tore away, then like Gaudapada says, he doesn't like necessarily accept the idea of Tantra's Leela. Why would God want to sport when God is full? Why would Shiva want to become with form when he's aptakama, free of desires all the time? So that would be a philosophical impossibility to sport without covering yourself first. Because the nature of Brahman is that when you take the masks off, then it's just all revelation. You just see the light and the light alone, and it takes you over. So there's no idea of sporting there. Why the idea of sporting ever came up in the first place? Well, ask yourself that. Why did you put on the ego, and give up the Purusha? Or if you did put on the ego, why don't you keep the Purusha in mind as you do put on the ego? So you can't really sport in Brahman, but you can keep Brahman in the sport. If you're going to go sport somewhere, take Brahman with you. But if you're going to Brahman, there's no way you can take sportiveness there. The idea is alien. You have to have some name, form, time, space, and causality, Maya, in order to have a form and to get a name and to commune with other forms. Well, we have just enough minutes left for Abhinaya's final question of the session.
Yes, Babaji, the question that I would like to ask is, well, this is also similar question as before. What is the difference between work and austerity? Is austerity a type of work? Would you consider it a work?
I think austerity is, it could be called spiritual self-effort. Of course, it's one of the niyamas, and it's very important to the spiritual path. There are people who like for instance, back to Tantra and sportiveness, that's not really considered an austerity. It's considered a sort of privilege or exquisite pleasure to sport in form. So like you saw Sri Ramakrishna dancing and singing and, fully, until he went into samadhi. I mean, that's a good case in point there, is that when he went into samadhi, he'd have to sit down, couldn't dance and sing anymore. But when he came out of samadhi, the tendency could be towards dancing and singing in ecstasy. So he's showing right there Brahman and Leela, so if you want to say it in a different way, you could say that you could turn your work into an austerity and benefit from it. Just like, labor as love, Vivekananda used to say, or work as worship. That's using karma yoga in order to transform your everyday actions. Otherwise, you're just doing everyday actions. It's very quotidian. It's very roundabout. It's courting the three gunas all the time. It's tiring to the body-mind mechanism. Restlessness tends to take over even your dream state. I mean, these are all things people are talking about nowadays that they're suffering from, but they don't know why. Well, the philosophy knows why. And it's all spiritual in nature. So you have to then go to a teacher and get the Dharma and use it against your problems and do away with them and be free. Pass your time contentedly and be free. You have to get back to the art form of it. So in that way, work that's pressing in on people, can turn into worship. You could turn it into austerity. You could turn it into service. And if karma yoga is the main yoga of the age right now, as far as what everyone's doing, then that would be the wisest and easiest choice to start to practice yoga in any capacity, unless you're naturally suited to devotion, which some people are. But not many people are suited towards higher wisdom or towards meditation. Those are, going to ask Tadrupa to give us a percentage again of how many people are into, of the masses are into meditation. Yeah, so work could be turned in those different ways, and I'd say probably better than could, should. There's could, there's should, there's would. There's all sorts of rhyming words like that you should probably take should and put it at the head of that list, and turn work into worship or into beneficial austerity, as you're saying. It's an austerity not just to go to work and put your physical energy to something. It's an austerity to get along with your coworkers. It's an austerity to face off with your boss. There's all sorts of austerities there at work. If you're a school teacher, like Akshaya Bhakti was, she had the austerity of having to face these high school kids and all their horrible comments. And, you know, we all know what American high school was like. That was like a hell somewhere back in our minds. For most of us anyway. Unless Maya had gotten you really good and given you popularity. So it's been a wonderful session today. I have to be a little bit prompt today with I have several other sessions to conduct today, which I usually don't on Saturday. So I'm going to call us on time here and bid adieu, as they say, or shanti, shanti, shanti to all, and give you my mahalo from Hawaii and my gratitude for continuing to join in this sacred activity called satsang. We want to have the whole world online soon, talking about these things and benefiting from them. So for that, again, look to our new website. I'm heavily pushing it. I don't usually advertise things or plug them, but the website is something really developing well. And you can support us by becoming a member, number one. But more importantly than that, once you are a member, you can drink in the nectar there at any time of day. And actually, it will be your spiritual practice, along with contemplating it when you shut down the computer, contemplating what you read, manana. So thank you all for your kind attentions, and we will meet again next Saturday, except for those of you who are looking into the Avata, the introduction today and tomorrow. I will see you online. Aloha, namaste.